Today we are blessed to have the presence of the luminary historians and scholars of our days now, Professor Dr. Adithya Mukherjee and Professor Dr. Mridula Mukherjee, former professors of JNU. We are now beginning our official program. I invite our HOD, Dr. Lieutenant Moideen C. for the welcome speech.
Good morning, all of you. Sorry for inconvenience of the time, and now going on direct to discussion. My official duty is welcome address. Dignitary of the dais of Professor Dr. Adithya Mukherjee, Dr. Mridula Mukherjee, Dr. Sebastian Joseph, and the faculties of the colleges and my colleges and students. The Postgraduate Department of and Research Department organized several seminars and workshops and several activities of every year. Now it is moving in 2023, during the time of the postgraduate department to commence, then to start off one national workshop about the historical method and conventional departures. And now it is going on this discussion of the second phase, because we are very happy to announce our department to now upgraded research department. Now I am to welcome of Professor Adithya Mukherjee, former Professor of Center of Historical Studies and former Director of the Academic Staff College of JNU. Sir completed the higher education from Delhi University and JNU, visiting fellow of Duke University, USA, Institute of Advanced Study of Language, University of UK, then France, Institute of Study of Brazil, and then to mineral work, advanced several fellowship like the Japan Society of the Promotion of Science, yes, fellowship, the University of Tokyo. However, the Japan Foundation of Fellowship, University of Tokyo. Professor also published several work, especially in the India struggle for independence and India after St.Mary College and our family. Welcome, sir. Then Mridula Mukherjee, Dr. Mridula Mukherjee, the former professor, Center for Historical Studies, and former director of the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. Now the president of the Indian History Congress of next session. It is he will conduct in Pondicherry. The complete degree from the DU and JNU. Man published several books and articles such as of India struggle for independence. Then magnum work of with the coordination of Bipin Chandra and India since independence. And to welcome to once again to the department and college. I welcome to Dr. Sebastian, former Secretary of Kerala History Congress and visiting professor of our department. Now the part of the history department as well as has been planned to design the several academic activities and the member of the department. Welcome, sir, to the department. Lastly, all are to welcome the faculty of different colleges and the students, and mostly once again welcome to all. Thank you to all. Thank you all are participate of these.
We are proudly welcome Dr. Sebastian Joseph, former Secretary of the Prof now.
Good morning to all of you. Professor Adithya, Professor Mridula, Dr. Moideen, and dear faculty members from this college, people who have come from our state, and especially welcome to two undergraduate students from SMC College, Vishnu and Rani. Professors, they are doing internship with me. So they came to two from CMS College. So this is a great occasion for the department a structural opportunity for the students to come and who have immense experience. They will get molded in the most jail, where they taught history, they studied history, they read history, and they fought for history. Mridula was asked to comment on the use of history. So it was an interview between Honorable Chakraborty professor, who was actually working in the JNU's CHS in medieval history section. He asked Mridula, see, Professor Mridula, what is your opinion about historical research in India? She said, good research is happening. So many good studies are coming out. But historians and history teachers are not coming to the public space, the public sphere, to practice what they teach, to practice what they read, to fight the forces of fascism and communalism. So that was a great motivation for many people who listen to that. History is not supposed to be a theoretical subject which is to rust in the archives or the museums. So many archives and museums are there. What is the use of these archives and museums if those histories are not transmitted in the much of number on May 1st, which is actually public holiday. Then definitely we want working days. So very positively we are looking forward to making want working days. So very positively we are looking forward to making this department systematically organized department for the propagation of historical studies. As far as I understand the process, history is a discipline which is usually considered to be a very big discipline, which is usually considered to be a very big discipline, which is to me, to the best of my understanding, history is having and revamping good for the society to continue. Not the traditions in usual sense, but the traditions, the academic traditions that are very, very vital for the continuation of a very dynamic school of history all over Kerala. So I think we are poised to become such, to receive such a status in future. And with these words, I invite both Professor Adithya Mukherjee and Professor Mridula Mukherjee to deliver their lectures. Professor Adithya will be talking on historical methodology and contemporary history, which is very important. He will be mixing methodology with the practice of history in contemporary times. He is a specialist in that. And secondly, as we are, in a post-modern sense, not just post-modern sense, but in a modern sense even, oral history is very important for recording neglected voices all over India, all over the world. So like to us that, Professor Mridula Mukherjee will be doing a talk on oral testimony, a valuable source for writing history. So these two lectures, actually, I lectures for the researchers, for them to orient themselves in theory as well as in the practice of research. With these words, I stop the introduction because actually the time is running out. We are all eager to hear to these two eminent historians. Thank you.
Sir, we have Professor Adithya Mukherjee. Sir, kindly. I like to invite our dear Professor Gigi Joseph to hand over our music, our popular class. We are beginning our next session now. Presentation of Professor Dr. Adithya Mukherjee. Topic: Historical Method and Contemporary History. Sir, kindly we are welcome you to dance.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad to be back here at this, what I consider a premier institution. It was, our experience in last time was extremely good here. So I really look forward to a conversation. It's a small group, so it's better that I don't speak too long and we have a discussion. If you have questions, we can talk about that. But I'm particularly grateful to Professor Sebastian Joseph for making it possible for us to come and talk to you, Dr. Moinin, Dr. Gigi, the entire faculty of the History Center, and many other who have come here. Initiate a discussion on what is contemporary history. To begin with, it's both contemporary and history. So what is contemporary history? I think some thought needs to be given to this question of what is contemporary history before we talk about the method of how to pursue contemporary history. If you look at how contemporary history is looked at globally, it's normally the interwar period that is treated as the contemporary period. Interwar, 20th century interwar period. The 19th century is seen as the modern emergence of the modern. 18th to 19th are the modern period, then contemporary is seen from the interwar period. This is, I mean, if I'm saying this on the basis of if you look at the Journal of Contemporary History, which is internationally the most famous journal, most of the articles will begin with the interwar period. Now this is a very Eurocentric way of looking at what is contemporary. What is contemporary for Europe need not be what is contemporary for us. There are many people in India who would say that 1947 is the break and post-47 is contemporary. Now this business of periodization is a very, historiographically a very important issue. And it has been an important issue for a long time. To give you a few examples. The first time in modern history writing, a periodization was made. It was made by a British scholar, James Gill. Hindu period, Muslim period, and then not Christian, but British period. Why do you think there is this distinction? Because the assumption is that we, the colonial people, the uncivilized, the bandars, the monkeys, we only relate to our primordial identity of religion and caste. They, the modern ones, can have identity of nation and class. So therefore it's Hindu rule, Muslim rule and British rule, not Christian rule, right? Now this is obviously absurd. There was no such thing as a Hindu rule or a Muslim rule. There were Muslim rulers, there were Hindu rulers, just as there were Buddhist rulers and Christian rulers. There is nothing to do with this. It's a completely absurd periodization made to suit the conditions in India. Because what followed from this description of Hindu rule and Muslim rule again in James Mill's writing, was the notion of Muslim atrocities, from which the British come, that they were drawing from there. We were taught in France on the challenges to the social sciences of the 21st century. I accepted, not realizing that it is a very tough task. I mean, how can you talk about the challenges of the whole of social sciences, and that too in the 21st century? But then to make my work easy, I thought, let me read the person who I think is the most outstanding scholar, historian that I had so far read. And I could think of Eric Hobsbawm, the very famous Marxist historian, who wrote The Age of Revolution, Age of Capital, Age of Empire, and then a volume called Age of Extremes, the short 20th century. So social history, he's written on almost everything, on nationalism, a range of issues. So I thought, let me start by reading that. And within the first 20 pages, I got what I wanted, a periodization which will surprise you. He is the originator of the notion of a long 19th century. He said that historical periods do not get divided into centuries. They are not boxes. Historical periods can be sometimes 200 years, sometimes 200. So he created the notion of the long 19th century, which he said lasted till 1914. And then the short 20th century begins, which is from 14 to about the 90s, the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then the 21st century phenomenon begins. Alright, so this is the periodization he's making. And then he says that the 19th century was the greatest century that human civilization saw. Arts, culture, industry, everything flourished. And you get figures like this, that in 1950, for example, if the total global output of steel was 8,000 or 10,000 tons, by the end of the century, it was about 15 million tons. So there is a quantum leap in industry, in the industrial revolution has spread all over the world and things like that. So he calls it the great century. And then he says the interwar period is the period of catastrophe. He calls it a catastrophic period. The two world wars, the Great Depression, the bad years. And then the golden age begins after the 1950s, which he says lasts till about the 1980s. And then again there is a catastrophe. The catastrophe is the collapse of the Soviet Union, etc., etc. Now that's when I realized that this could be written by one of the greatest historians, because he was located in London. If you looked at the world from New Delhi or from Beijing, this would look absurd. The 19th century is not our great century. The 18th century is our great century. In the 18th century, India produced 8 times the GDP of United Kingdom. 8 times. India and China produced 2.5 times the GDP of all the European countries put together. And India and China's population easily was the overwhelming population of the world. So you are talking of a history which is for the Europeans. For them, the 19th century was a good century. For India and China, the 19th century was the worst century. That is when we are colonized, our noses are rubbed in the ground. You know, our art, culture, medicine, everything ceases, I mean, it stops. The progress, organic development of all this stops. And he's calling it the great century. And he's calling the period 1914 to 45, the interwar period, as a catastrophe. Now works have shown that this was the period of imperialism in crisis. The wars and all the the colonial countries like India, like Indonesia, like Egypt, their growth spurted forward. Professor Mridula created the notion of links with imperialism weakened in this period because of the war and the depression. Our economy saw spurt forward. So the good period for us was the catastrophe for them. And then he says catastrophe in the 1980s again. 1980s is when periodization-wise the world moves from an American century to the Asian century. You see, one way of dividing the last 200 and 300 years would be when Europe dominates the world, then the 20th century and towards the end of the 20th century, clearly Asia dominates. Why is it that a certain he says this is human civilization's growth. It's an upward line which is growing. Human civilization is progressive. So if you see, he says the progress of human civilization over several thousand years, let's say from the ancient period or even the roughly the ancient period till today, then he said the domination of Europe in this long graph is a tiny little village. Just 200 years. Out of these thousands of years, I just gave you the figures. India was the largest producer of the world's GDP. India and China were competing with each other. Between India and China, 30 and 25, 55% of the world's GDP. There's no question. And the great civilizations of the world, the Egyptian and there are a whole bunch of civilizations all over the world which are not European. So there is no question of Europe dominating. Europe dominates only in that period. 20th century Europe doesn't dominate, and now there is no question of Europe dominating, right? But it is in this period of European domination, the short period, that all the modern disciplines, and therefore that in the birth of the discipline to the that we have to deal with, which I had not had. When they allow and actually interact with students and try to answer their questions. So eventually one has come to the following conclusion, that contemporary history has got nothing to do with the period. Contemporary history is asking a contemporary question and then going back to what is contemporary history. I'll give you several examples. One of the first, what you have, you can, not because of that, India was not poor. So as I said, we have to go back at least to the beginning of the 18th century, when we were the world's biggest producer. Mind you, the world's biggest Watson record called How to Make Text. We became poor at least 200 to 200. The person from democracy till recently. The question would be, because are given in multiple ways. People, the American and British scholars, people like Paul Brass would say, for example, that India is a democracy because the British ruled over India and they taught us that. India, we were trained, unfortunately had to do constitutional history and learn all those dates, 1909 reform, 1919 reform, 1935 reform, 1861 reform. What were these reforms? These tiny bits of 150 years to train the Indians, and then we became independent. So why did we need the national movement? So what does the Cambridge School say? That there was no national movement. But that's not our answer to why India is a democracy. Our answer will be, India is a democracy because our national movement imagined India from the 19th century is talking of adult for the world. Did you have adult women to vote? Yes, where everybody wants to. But still having that is why I am saying that contemporary history cannot be restricted to a period. The question is contemporary. I am going back till the 19th century to say why India is a democracy. People like Jawaharlal Nehru and Amartya Sen asked the same question. That how come India has survived as a democracy? A country which is as diverse as India. It can't even be a nation. How can you be a so if you can't be a nation, and certainly you cannot be a democracy. But Nehru was the first to argue in the discovery of India. He is a dialogue to live with difference. And he said that he had this dialogical tradition. Examples of the university in Banaras, and you do what? Tark. You argue. So the argument was to be the essence of education. Similarly, Amartya Sen in two of his books, The Idea of Justice and The Argumentative Indian, says that if you go back and look at Sanskrit, Amartya Sen was also a scholar of Sanskrit. He said that if you go back and look at Sanskrit and compare it with any other questioning, no, not. Again, this concept is you want to understand. He's not. And then Nehru, Indian society, in a sense, deal with the caste difference. Similarly, Sikhism is born to deal with religious difference. If you look at the Guru Granth Sahib, which is what is the basic religious text, you would, if you hear it, you'll wonder how come there is so much Ram and Rahim and everything in it. Because it is a mixture. The whole Sufi and Bhakti movement that comes in for centuries is an effort of Indian society over time to live with India, even today, a nation, and the possibility of a democracy. Mridula and I were once invited to a European Union discussion group where a delegation had come from the European Union to come and study how is India a country? How is it India is a nation where India has far more diversity than Europe? And the difference between a Kashmiri and a Tamil, there is no question of the difference, right? And they say that we can't even form a union, a loose union, and you are a nation. Now you must understand that these are deep historical questions. It doesn't happen accidentally, just because Gandhiji thought so. The national movement could imagine India as a country which will celebrate diversity because we have a civilizational heritage that you can live with diversity. Alright? So this is an example I am giving you of how this tradition continues. Recent communal historiography breaks this tradition that we were great. On the contrary, if you look at the Mughal period, if you look at Akbar, in the 6th Muslim, and he talks all that. So one of the justifications of imperialism is we are bringing enlightenment to you. Of religion, so there is no question to modernity. Second, all history is contemporary. He is related to his contemporary conditioning. Like when Modi, what question is he asking? Those are the questions. Whereas somebody else will question from what Hitler would be asking from genetics, right? And they come to completely different solutions. But this is not what is meant by this is quite different from the way we are defining contemporary history. That we looked at the ancient period or medieval period with contemporary questions doesn't make that ancient period or the medieval period contemporary history. Contemporary history is when you are trying to explain your contemporary situation with going back as much as is necessary. I'll give 2 or 3 examples of this to bring the story home. Before I do that, just one more point. Contemporary history, like the discipline of history itself, must be by definition multidisciplinary. History is the only discipline which by definition is multidisciplinary. What do I mean by that? And I want to say this to especially young people who often think that doing history is the last option. Why history should be the first option? Because it is the most complex discipline. In history, you cannot make assumptions as you make, let's say, in economics. The economists are very famous for this. They will say, assuming there is no political disturbance, assuming there is no climate change, and they will make 50 assumptions and then say that if you increase the input of capital, what will be the impact on labor? Historian can't say assume anything. So it has to take into account psychology, an economist, which is interview the pharaohs, or something like that, right? But a contemporary history can. We have right. But a contemporary history can. We have interviewed. We have done about several thousand hours of interviews, starting from Kerala. From Kasaragod we went district from Kerala. From Kasaragod we went district by district to the southernmost tip. Interviewing people, ordinary people, Dalit persons, communists, them into politics. What were the issues at that time? And it was an enormous help. Because the archives, you must know, just because it has written sources, it's not somehow better sources. Because who makes the archives? You have to remember that. The archive, for example, if a political meeting is to be reported, some police inspector will be asked in the colonial reported. Some police inspector will be asked in the colonial times to give an account of that. So it's the police inspector's report which you are finding in the archive. Or it may be even a journalist's report. But if you look at today's journalists, the poor don't get counted, isn't it? There may be 100 rapes of poor women and it won't get reported. One upper class woman is pushed, and it will be all over the newspaper. In other words, what is happening at the grassroots, for understanding that, it is critical. Oral history is a critical method of getting there, as we will hear from Mridula. As I am fond of saying, you do not study the subalterns, you do not study the underclass simply by calling yourself the subaltern school. The subaltern school specializes in saying that we are the first one to talk about the poor by being a minimum 10,000 miles away from the poor. The entire subaltern school resides in either USA or England or Australia or Sussex or here or there. And they speak in a language which people on the poor, even Tintu and I can't understand. You try and read Gayatri's Vivek and you will know. Your teeth will break. Okay. Now I'll give you 2 or 3 quick illustrations why contemporary history is so important. First, if you look at India's development strategy, and if you look at the works of the economists, they all start with the first plan. That our development strategy was this, because the first plan said this, second plan said that, etc., etc. And it's completely ahistorical. You cannot explain it that way. The reason why India has a different development strategy from China or Indonesia is because of the nature of the movement which created the new state. It's an obvious truism, but people do not understand this. That the state that is born is bound to be a product of the nature of the movement that created the state. And our national movement made democracy, sovereignty, pro-poorness as critical elements in the making of the nation state. Now what does that mean? It means at independence, no state could say, let's forget about democracy, let's have a partnership between an industrial bourgeoisie and an authoritarian state, and we'll have quick growth. And then we will think about democracy after 50 years. Now this is a real example I am giving you. This is what East Asia did. South Korea's development is based on this. A partnership between an authoritarian state, no unionization, 60-hour a week labor, and industrial Japanese. So both sovereignty was compromised. Japan grew from 1950 to 1970 at 10% per annum, catapulting itself from a developing country like others, like India, to the second largest economy in the world. But at what cost? As junior partner of the Americans, as the base for Vietnam, as the base for Korean War, as giving up their autonomy till today. Even now Japan cannot decide whether they will have nuclear armament or whether they will go with the size of their army or whether they can start an Asian Development Bank, etc. Big Brother still has to give a nod. Now in India in 1947, if somebody argued either of the two models, that is, let's have a semi-sovereign model or let's have an undemocratic model, that person would be in the dustbin of history. So nobody argued it. The Bombay plan, which is called the Tata Birla plan, doesn't argue this. Tata Birla plan argues for a public sector. It says that we must have a democracy, we must be anti-imperialist. So from the communist to the capitalist, there was an agreement. That is why we have the kind of plan we have. Let me give you an extreme example of this. One of the most well-known economists who wrote on land reforms is Professor A.M. Khusro. You may have heard of him. He was the Vice Chancellor of Aligarh University. He was the Director of the NCAER, National Council for Applied Economic Research. He held almost any position of importance in economic management in the country. Any scholar who writes on land reform starts with Khusro. So I also, since I've written a few chapters on land reform in the India since independence, the first thing I picked up was Khusro. But I'm a historian, he's an economist, that's the difference. And what do I find? He says India's land reforms can be largely explained because of the existence of an extraordinary bureaucracy in India at that time. In other words, the bureaucrats led the land reform. Of course, there were 2 or 3 very good bureaucrats, Bandyopadhyay, T.S. Appu, they are very well known, who implemented the original land reform. But imagine to talk of land reform after independence based on this. The land reform after independence is a product of nearly 100 years, 19th century itself. The Kisan Sabha movements, wherever the peasant movements were strong, the land reforms were easy. The landlords virtually got no compensation, like Kashmir. Wherever the peasant movements were weak, the land reforms had a huge amount of problem. So it's a product of the movements. It's a product, absolutely a product of your recent history, which will determine whether you can or cannot have land reform. But an economist, only an economist can say that it is a product of the bureaucrat. So that's another example of why you must do. I'll give you another example. The dialectics of a study of a contemporary phenomenon which all of you will recognize. And this will show you that how a study of contemporary history enables you to theorize historical phenomenon better, as well as understand the current condition. The example I am choosing is that of the massive migration of Indians to the West, the brain drain as we call it. I'm not talking of the migration of, the masons and the drivers, etc. I mean, that's an economic migration, which is not the subject of what I'm talking. That's not called brain drain. Brain drain is when the cream of your society just migrates. As you know, the cream of our educated Nehru, as I've written in my book, was one of the greatest contributions he made was that he anticipated the knowledge revolution by about half a century. The first plan, 1950s, all the institutions of knowledge you know about, all. IITs, IIMs, AIMS, Sangeet Natak Academy, Bharat Kala Academy, whatever, just think of them. Film Institute, the National School of Drama, the National Institute of Virology. As I said, that list is long, just read my book. I have a whole page with every institution that you know of made in the 50s and 60s. It is the products of that which has enabled India to participate in the information revolution that the world is seeing today. All right? So the products started coming out by the mid-60s. The IITs are built in the 50s. By mid-60s, late 60s, the products started coming out. From that time onwards, entire batches of AIMS, of IITs would sit the exam to go to the US. And at the moment, it's not only IITs, even regional engineering colleges of Andhra Pradesh, have associations all over the United States because they have migrated en masse. Already, people have gone to the West and we have colonized them, we have taken over the research triangle, we have taken over the California, what is it called?
Silicon Valley.
Huh?
Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley, etc., etc. We will give examples of 2 or 3 people, the chief of Google and this, that, and the other. In fact, one IIT professor I once met, and I was getting my car serviced, and he also came for servicing his car. But as you know, Indians don't have to be introduced to start talking. Right? You immediately start talking. You first find out what the other person's salary is, what his caste is, and once you've got the basic facts right, then you know how to converse, whether to be condescending or to be equal, etc. That's the normal Indian conversation, right? In railway stations and everywhere. So this conversation started. He realized I was a professor. Yeah? So he said, "Sir, Mukherjee, I am delighted today." And now this is a conversation between professors. I also knew. So I assumed that he's talking about some great breakthrough, some student of his, right? Some invention or some discovery. He says, "Professor Mukherjee, this year my entire class has gone to US. I'm a JNU product, I almost fainted. Then what a sense of great pride that you managed to persuade your whole class to migrate to this. But then, it sounds funny, but it's not funny. This is exactly what every parent, every teacher is telling every Indian to do. Now, how do we understand this? If you have a sense of contemporary history, you would categorize this as a colonial phenomenon. You will improve your understanding of colonialism. Now, when we were children and when we were taught history from class 5 onwards, one thing we learned was colonialism means export of Manufactured, export of raw material, import of manufacturing. Export of raw materials, import of manufacturing. But the matter is, for the bulk of the colonial period, the reverse was happening. It is not true. India was still the biggest exporter of textiles in 18th century till early 19th century. Colonial rule. So it's not a necessary thing. Colonialism is basically the transfer of whatever happens to be the critical factor of production at that period of historical time. To give you an example, 16th century, 15th, 16th century, when colonialism, the first Portuguese and Spanish colonial enterprises began. They discover India, an ancient civilization, So you grab other people's land and you commit the people of that land to labor. To such hard labor that they die. This happened in Indonesia. Entire islands, the population died, 99%. In Mexico, about 95% of the indigenous Mexican people died in the mines that they were made to work in. So what do? You bring labor from Africa. So it is grabbing other people's labor and grabbing other people's land, which was not colonialism. No export of raw material, no export of import of manufactured goods. It is once industrialization occurs in the metropole that you see this phenomenon, and at that time colonialism is the transfer of capital, because you need capital for industrialization. And to give you just one figure, when England was industrializing, at the peak of its industrialization, beginning of the 19th century, 85% of its gross domestic capital formation, which is the biggest, 85% of what they invested came from the loot from the colonies. So we funded their industrialization. Alright, so that was what was colonialism at that time. Today is a post-industrial society. So what is the critical factor of production? Knowledge. And what are we doing? We are handing over our knowledge to the metropolis and patting ourselves in the back for it. And our governments are going and arguing with the American government, plus more H-1B visa, so that we can send off more of our people. This is when you don't have a sense of history. Then you begin to celebrate your own colonization. In the 1960s, only 14% of the PhDs in the STEM areas, you know what that means? The science, maths, etc. Only 14% of the PhDs in America were by non-Americans from outside. Today, 40%, 2/5, 2 out of 5 PhDs in advanced areas of research in the US are by non-Americans. A large part of it is Indian and Chinese. These are statistics of the American statistics that I am quoting to you. 95% of the Indians who go to the United States and work in these areas stay there. They don't come back. So what are you saying? The USA is just raking it in. The best talent from all over the world who have been trained by the blood and soil, the sweat of the poor people of those countries, and handed over as a gift to the most advanced part of the world. Here is an example, a good example of how an adequate analysis of contemporary history enables you to understand colonialism better and also to seek solutions for your contemporary problems. As I said, if you do not have an historical mind, you would miss it altogether. I think I have any questions. I'll be more than, if you will permit me, one of the questions that how do we explain the enormous inequality that we are witnessing in India today? Obscene levels of inequality, isn't it? Elephant-like children of the richest man in India feeding elephants by the thousands. You've all seen videos of that, isn't it? Whereas India happens to be below Sub-Saharan Africa in the hunger index. It is, as I said, only word for it is obscene levels of inequality. Also, we have what explains the loss of sovereignty that we are witnessing in India. We don't stand up and speak on any issue. You can do genocide in Gaza and we go and play ball with Israel. Now, this was unthinkable in the 1950s. We were a poor country in the 1950s, but we stood up on each of these issues, on Vietnam, on Korea, on Belgian Congo, wherever there was oppression, we stood up and opposed it. And Nehru was apparently asked that, how is it that you are a poor country going around with a begging bowl? How is it that you make these comments on international affairs? He said, we may be poor, but who has told you that the poor cannot have a voice? Right? But the question you will ask is that why is it that today we have this high inequality and loss of sovereignty? And the answer that often comes from the left is this is because of globalization. This is what globalization and liberalization has done to us. A contemporary history student will ask the question, is this true? What happened to India from 1991 to say 2008? Did inequality increase? Did we lose our sovereignty? Quite the contrary. The figures for the post-1990 reform is that poverty actually declined the sharpest. Inequality remained, but poverty declined, and our dependence on the external world reduced dramatically. One way of measuring dependence is what is called the debt service ratio. That is, to service the debt we have from the world, how much of our external earnings is going into that. Now that in 1991 was 35, which means 35% of whatever we earned, we were just paying as interest, for previous debt. So that is a very high level of dependency on foreign capital. We came down from that by 2004 to 6%. So both sovereignty and inequality were declining. And in the Kollam talk also, I repeated this. So this phenomenon was explained by the Brazilian president, Cardoso. Cardoso was a left dependency thinker. He was a professor, like Manmohan Singh, but of the left variety, Marxist. And he led Brazil into globalization, out of military dictatorship into globalization and democracy. So he came to India in the 1990s, just when our reforms had started. And our left scholars asked him that, Professor Cardoso, how could you do this? You are a Marxist. How did you take Brazil into the globalization path? So he told them, you are asking the wrong question. The question you should ask is not whether to globalize, but how to globalize. Globalization, he said, has become a fact. This is the what he called the post-Iron Curtain, the post-Bamboo Curtain period. That is, the Soviet Union has collapsed. China is now competing to be a capitalist country. There is no alternative. Globalization, he said, if you do not globalize, you will become a Myanmar. So globalize you have to. The question you should ask as a radical is, how do you globalize? Do you globalize with a safety net for the poor and by keeping your sovereignty intact, or do you globalize by abandoning your poor and by becoming a junior partner to some superpower? That is the question you should ask. And then he said, a historical answer, he said, that your country will not choose the latter path. In your country, you have an advantage over Brazil, that your country will not sell out to a foreign power, nor will it abandon its poor, because, he said, you have a tradition of struggle from Gandhiji's time. Gandhiji, Nehru, socialization of struggle, and you have a democracy. So your people will not permit it. And these were prophetic words. The moment 1991 reforms occurred, go to the newspapers of that time. Civil society was active. They were saying, what will happen to the poor? What will happen to the poor? All over the country were at their top. Result? It is in this period of globalization that all the right-based laws that you know came up. Right to information, right to education, right to food, right to employment, all of them came at that period. That is, the poor were provided a safety net. Globalization is occurring, structural adjustment is occurring, but there is a safety net. And there is no question of selling out to even something which might have been good for India. You may remember that the entire left actually left the coalition because we went in the nuclear deal with the United States. So there was a lot of resistance. You couldn't just go and become Trump's junior partner and say, "Agli baar Modi, Trump Sarkar." You couldn't even think of doing that, right? So the answer to the question why we have inequality, obscene inequality, abandoning of the poor, complete abandonment of the poor. Doesn't matter. Whether they die, you can lock down, you can make them walk 2,000 miles in 45 degrees temperature, dragging their old and the poor. The whole world saw it. You can see the poor having to throw away their dead family members into the river because they don't have the money to even cremate them. All of this is well known, all of it on videos you can see. So, why could this happen? The historical answer is that our democracy has been compromised. The reason why we are today witnessing the abandonment of our poor and the abandonment of our sovereignty is because our democracy is seriously compromised. Not only compromised, no longer are we called a democracy in the world. We were called an electoral autocracy. Now with the Bengal election, you can see even that is too much of a concession. An election in which 1/3 of the voters have been disenfranchised. In many constituencies, 1/3 of the voters doubtful. Something they're finding what is the phrase that they're using. This doubtful category.
Logical discrepancy.
Logical discrepancy. Why is there more than a 15-year gap between you and your father? That means there is something wrong. Idiotic reasoning. And the Supreme Court said, no, we will advise, put this committee. So they put a committee of several hundred judicial officers to look at the complaints. Something like 87 lakhs votes were deleted. Something like 35 lakh people managed to actually make a complaint. It had to be online. So the poor agricultural worker has to now find a way of making an online complaint on a computer to say why his name should be there. Even then, 35 lakh people managed. And what did these judicial officers manage to do? 120 or 130 people were given this. They haven't had the time to look at it. And when people raised it in the Supreme Court and said, what is this? So the Supreme Court judge says, doesn't matter, they can vote next time. So that is where we are in terms of democracy. And the answer to a political, economic answer to our foreign policy and to our current condition of the poor, as the answer lies in politics, not in economics. It is the diminution of our democracy which is at stake. That's the contemporary history lesson I learned. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Mukherjee, for a very insightful lecture. A historian, a contemporary historian, and one who can easily integrate economic, political, and social histories to a far greater level from an Indian perspective as well as from a global perspective. So, can we open up this lecture for a brief interaction? Later, we can have a lecture of Prof. Mukherjee. So now it is open for discussion.
women of Canada should ask questions, no? Maybe they can think about it.
So this question is not entirely historical, but some political question. So these days we are seeing that certain dispensations, once they get into power, it's very difficult to dislodge them from power. And I think that they are manipulating history now. The potential of history has been realized by them, and they are misusing it, and it is by misusing them they are getting entrenched in power. So we are in a helpless situation. I think, and there is no optimism. It's pessimism everywhere. And I'm so sorry to say like that, sir, but so just now you have said that the Supreme Court judge, such a foolish statement emanating from such a higher authority that they can wait for next election. The same thing we have heard when that person who is languishing in jail, his bail petition came before the Supreme Court. Let him come after 1 year. Yeah. What type of, there is no ray of hope anywhere, sir. We are punching more and more into a situation of desperation, I think. And one more thing I would like to say, that to you, people like you, we are looking towards for validation of our own convictions. It's your opinions that that refine, that gives a sense of solace for us. If we are looking into the TV, we can see people like that Anand Ranganathan or Sai Deepak in Oxford accented language. They are omitting some rubbish things, and then hopeless analogy, crude analogy is like practicing cannibalism with spoon and fork.
Practicing?
Cannibalism with spoon and fork. So this is an entirely helpless situation. So I would like to know some comments from you.
Well, thank you for your comment. I totally agree with you that what we are witnessing is what we call the weaponizing of history for a divisive purpose, for a negative purpose. But that doesn't mean that we can, and what should be our attempt? Our attempt should be to draw from history exactly the opposite. You see, and especially since we have the example in front of us of one of the world's biggest mass movements, which did exactly the same. After all, the British notion of Muslim atrocity, of Hindus and Muslims being two separate nations, the notion supported by all the Muslim League and Hindu Mahasabha, etc., was resisted. Under British rule, it could be resisted. With state patronage far greater than Modi has, isn't it? The British controlled the education system, the police, the judiciary, the bureaucracy, everything. And yet people could resist, find ways. And the best talent of the country went into countering that view and created a nationalist common sense of which we are the products. Even now, the reason why I am not despondent, unlike you, why we have hope. Think of any creative writer today. Any creative writer, the best historian, the best economist, the best minds, the best filmmakers. They're on our side. They're on our side, but they're not speaking up. So that is why a movement is necessary. A movement which will make all of us speak up louder, more assertively. Gandhiji said no tyrant can live forever. They will eventually go. But the point is at what cost and how long? It is up to us to ensure that the tyrants go quickly.
Come on, don't be shy, ask something. There.
So, when we talk about fascism and how it emerges in different countries, we often look into Europe, Italy, Germany, etc. My question is, like how you just historicize the nature of the inevitability of democracy in India. How can we historicize the current condition of the society and our state apparatus at large? How can we historicize our current condition from the history of India itself, without how we naturally go to Europe, Mussolini, etc.?
Very good question. Thank you very much. Two things about comparison with Europe when you're talking of fascism. First thing is, no two countries have an identical method of fascism. And again, unfortunately, being a historian, we go back. Jawaharlal Nehru was one of the first to say so. He described the emergence of the Muslim League and the RSS in the late 30s and 1940s as the Indian version of fascism. He said if fascism ever comes to India, it will come in the form of majoritarian communalism. He is predicting what it is going to be. So, it is an Indian version, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't borrow the methodology of the fascists. The RSS sent its people to meet Mussolini. They went and learned from him. They, in Savarkar's and Golwalkar's writing, there is an open acknowledgement of what they've learned from Hitler and Mussolini and saying that we should follow these methods. So they are indeed borrowing from that tradition, Europe. Our national movement borrowed also many things from Europe, but the alternate tradition. They borrowed the democratic tradition, they borrowed the Marxist tradition. These people are drawing from the fascist tradition. The route it has taken is bound to be different. There are no Jews to kill here, but there are Muslims to kill, no?
Dr. Sir, so you talked about the obscene inequality in India and other problems like we are compromising our democracy, so on. Then you also talked about the brain drain that's happening in India. So how I'm also a faculty, like I'm also teaching students. So these are the problems that we are facing today. So how can we encourage our young generation to stay in India and use their knowledge here so that we can develop as our own? Like, can you explain this in a historian's point of view?
Very, very good question. And it's a question you also asked. Again, in this, fortunately, the critical role is of the teacher. Like, we were the first batch of students in JNU. None of us in the first batch even applied for a PhD abroad. Our teachers told us that if you do not do PhD with us here, if the bright ones don't stay here, how will the caliber of the university rise? Everybody was willing to publish their articles, one article in a foreign journal. So when I wrote one of my pieces, it was invited by a top foreign journal. I went and asked my professors, Professor Romila Thakur and Vipin Chandra. They said, if you publish abroad, then how will we build up our journal? So we published in Studies in History, a new journal. So it can be done. And this is not just one example. As Mridula will tell you, when we did our oral history thing, and we often would ask people that what motivated them. The standard answer, 99% of the people said, my school teacher. My school teacher or my mother motivated me into doing something beyond myself. You know the normal tendency, go grab for yourself and your family. From that, why do you begin to think about the country? The role of the teacher is critical. But unfortunately, during the national movement, fortunately, this was realized. What did the nationalist leaders do? Set up national schools. What did Gandhiji do? What did Ashwini Kumar do? Set up national schools. Set up, and people gave up big careers, great offers, possibilities of doing their law degree in Lincoln, Sim and all that, to come and study in Gujarat with their feet. And there they became the leaders, intellectual leaders. So we have to create an atmosphere where the teachers will have to have a critical role. We have to have 20 AMUs. But unfortunately, our political leaders think it is more important to build a bridge than a university. A flyover is more important for them than employing teachers on full time. Teachers will be contractual. In Kerala, at least contractual teachers get a decent salary. In most parts of the country, they get 20,000 rupees. Even less sometimes. That is less than a driver or a cook. You're not going to build up a society if that is how you treat your teachers. So, a lot of things need to change, and we have to make a noise about it till it changes.
Thank you very much, Professor Adithya and Pradeep, for clarifications, and also thank you for brilliant questions from the audience. So now I invite Professor Mukherjee to deliver the much awaited talk on oral testimony as a source for historical reconstruction. Professor Mridula, please.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here in January, February, early February of 23. So this is, and we were very happy that we got the invitation to come back here because we had a very good experience here. Very bright students asking very good questions. So we were really looking forward to coming back here and meeting all of you again. So thank you for being here, that too on a Monday, or rather on May Day, and should try and keep it short so that we can have some discussion. The time is already 1 o'clock. Okay. Now, the topic that oral history as a source of history. So I will talk in general terms also, but let me share with you first, let me introduce where I am coming from. What is it that I am basing my understanding on, which I am going to share with you today. So about how many? 40 years ago, in the early mid 1980s, we embarked on a huge project of oral history. This is from JNU, a group of scholars led by Professor Vipin Chandra, who was the head, and myself, Professor Adithya Mukherjee, Professor Sucheta Mahajan, and a few others. Decided that we were working on a project to write the history of the Indian freedom struggle, and while having the discussions, we felt that it was very necessary to collect these testimonies of people who were still very much around. Leaders, as workers, harder people who were not necessarily participants, maybe from Because this was, at that time, oral history was not popular at all. It was not thought a necessary part of your research that you did oral history, but what happened was that I personally, for my PhD research, I was working on peasant struggles in colonial Punjab. And when I started doing my research, started collecting the material, I found that written sources, archival sources, the traditional sources on which historians base their research were very, very thin when it came to giving me answers to this. Because this is not, I'm not talking about studying a major movement like civil disobedience movement or Quit India movement or non-cooperation movement where the sources would be abundant. I was talking about peasant struggles, and primarily these struggles were led by the left wing, the Kisan Sabha, Punjab Kisan Sabha, which was a wing of the All India Kisan Sabha, which is a body which was set up by communists and socialists in 1936. But there were also precursors to it. So when I started going around and looking for stuff, I came back and I told my supervisor, I said, this is not going anywhere. I'm not getting to the meat of what you people tell me, that there was very vibrant peasant struggles at that time. You go and find out. But what should we do? So he said, okay. He said, Professor Vipin Chandra was back, and he said, okay, let's contact some people who are still there, from whom I had heard these stories about what a powerful peasant struggle we had in colonial Punjab. So we contacted some of the communist leaders from Punjab who were there in the All India Kisan Sabha in Delhi and all that, and started, that introduced me. And in the past, which you will not find recorded in history. In the normal sources. And once I started interviewing these people, meeting and talking to them, I started to get a picture that they like a treasure trove. Hidden treasure which just opened up. There was so much material with one, it would be you don't know, you are not so and so. You must go and make so and so. And I would take that lead, and in that method, through trial and error, I started traveling all over with my tape recorder and going to remote places, sometimes on a rickshaw, sometimes on a tonga and whatnot. This is I'm talking of early 80s. And that was also the time militancy started in Punjab. So once or twice, it was just near some big incident that had taken place, so people in Delhi were very worried what is happening. When I came back, and naturally, we had a group of scholars to regularly meet, discuss, I started telling them about my wonderful discoveries, how I was collecting material, where I was getting the whole stories, and more than the stories, I was getting the perceptions, I was getting their understanding of what was going on, what had gone on. And through those, I had to go back to archival sources because now I have leads. See, even to go to archival sources, suppose I am studying a 20-year period, 25-year period, where do I begin? If I don't have some lead, I can't just pick up any report from any year and start. I have to know where to look. Now, from these people, I got a broad picture of what had actually happened. Then I went back to archives, I went back to the the newspapers, the other traditional sources, pamphlets, this, that, and the whole picture began. So when I would come back and tell my colleagues, my supervisor, other friends and all about how, this was such a rich source, people initially were very skeptical and all, but then as we went on, we realized that, we were sitting on gold mines, which nobody had explored. So at that same time, we started doing this All India project, and my personal experience of how I hit upon oral history because I couldn't find any other source, went into the making of this project where oral history became a very big part of it. And then we, as Adithya mentioned, we started from Kerala, it so happens, in the summer of 1984, and from Kasaragod down all the way till Trivandrum. We covered a lot of areas. We interviewed peasant leaders, communist leaders, labor leaders, women, various kinds. And then we carried this across a lot of the country. Now I'm not going into that, I will telling you this, that my understanding of oral history comes not from a theoretical beginning. It comes from a practical beginning in my own research and in the research which we then did on the participants of the freedom struggle. So I am not telling you, giving you, as I said, a generalized theory of oral history. I am going to share with you what we found when you are studying popular movements, when you are studying mass movements, what are the kind of things that oral history can teach you. Now, obviously, if you are studying environmental history or whatever, there will be some commonalities. How you can go about and what are the precautions, which I will talk about. What are the basic methods, but certainly there will be lots of differences over there. So please keep in mind that what I am sharing with you is based on this background. Let me also share with you a happy event, which is that we are going to be publishing very soon the first book collection of these interviews which we did in the 80s. They have not yet been ever published. They were long stories. Took a very long time, transcription, preservation, and all that, and that of EMS number. But it will be very much there. From other we have Achut socialists. We have tried to do a sampling of different political trends, different regions, and also we have observed from the side of the bureaucracy. So some of the things I will share with you are also based on this recent work that we have completed. Now, let me also just begin with you that today's situation is very different. Oral history has become something acceptable. When we started out on this project, oral history was still looked upon with great suspicion by scholars. So I still remember that after we did the first, big round of these interviews, Professor Bipin Chandra made a major presentation at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, a seminar, where a lot of historians of all kinds, came. Some 100 to 100 people were there, and he made the presentation of this work which he was doing with all of us. There was so much skepticism, and many of the very well-known historians were very dismissive and questioned him very closely that how can you be sure? Oral evidence is after all oral evidence, and this and that and the other. And I want to share with you, because I think that's the basic, his reply to them. He said that the same standards and methods of authentication that are applied to archival records, private papers, newspapers, memoirs. What are memoirs? That's also a person's story, but only written in print. Pamphlets will have to be applied to oral evidence. Oral evidence, don't treat it as something so special that you always have to be suspicious. All sources are suspicious. As Adithya said, when you read in an archival file, report of a meeting written by a policeman, why is it more authentic than if I had done an interview with the person who participated in that meeting, who was sitting in that meeting? Why is his evidence of what happened over there less authentic or less trustworthy? So there is no reason to begin by being more suspicious of oral evidence than you would be of. Very often people tell you it's subjective, people will try to, exaggerate their role. They will try to put in their version of things. But everywhere is their version of things. Every piece of evidence is somebody's version of things. Whether it's a newspaper reporter who's writing for the newspaper, or whether it's the policeman who's sending in the report, or the chief secretary of the province who puts together the reports, fortnightly reports from Madras presidency and sends them, and we go and think they're very authentic because they are in old files, dusty files, and they are printed, therefore we treat them with great respect. No, the historian has first and foremost always to contend with this, that your job is to interrogate your sources. No source can be swallowed as God's truth, or the only truth, which is why we emphasize on multiplicity of sources. That's the other thing I want to say. We are emphasizing on oral history, it is not to the exclusion of other sources of history. In fact, no source should be, if I wrote a history of peasant struggles based entirely on newspapers, you would say this would be a very biased side. You have to look at government sources. You have to possibly, as I said, look at oral history. You have to look at so many private papers. You have to look at the perspectives which you may get from different layers of society, So the same standards, the same skepticism, the same thing apply to oral history. It's not something unique, so you don't have to also worry about it so much and treat it as if it's very suspicious. I would say all sources, are suspicious. All right. Sorry. Yeah. Alright, so now of course these questions are not asked in this kind of way, and oral evidence has become an accepted part of the historian's life. Let me share with you our understanding of what do I think are the areas which oral testimony of political activists and parties and even observed, not only for submitting factual information about not adequately documented otherwise. That of course, that is not the only thing that we say, it's a supplementary, another source for documenting. But it is especially useful for understanding aspects movements which are otherwise not easy to understand based on traditional sources. Now, what are those aspects? Ideology, consciousness, social origins of participants, methods of grassroots mobilization. I'm just giving you a few, and I'll illustrate to you why. These aspects on which inevitably written sources are far from adequate. Why do I say that to study the ideology of a movement you need to go to oral history? You said you can study it from pamphlets. All political parties, movement you can find in Joshi archives, contemporary history archives, you will find Congress party pamphlets, you will find Kisan Sabha pamphlets. Yes, of course you will find it. But our experience has been that there is a big gap between what we find in the written statements of the parties and the organizations and what ideology is actually understood, even by the leaders and certainly by people lower down in the hierarchy, from what is there written in the formal statements over there. There is much greater flexibility. I'll give you examples. One of the things we were always trying to find out in our work was what is the relationship between people belonging to different political strands within the broad anti-imperialist movement. Now, if you look at party documents, you will always see very sharp lines. Congress party document, you will see will be very sharply critical of the part of, let's say, Gandhi or of Indian National Congress or whatever. Kisan Sabha documents, you will see, it will always come out as if they are the only ones, who are taking that kind of radical stand in the peasantry and all that. But you go and talk to the same people who may have written those documents also, the story they tell you is something completely different. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, Harkishan Singh Surjit, he was the General Secretary of the Congress Party of India, Marxist, and he was a major peasant leader in Punjab, which is the area originally of my PhD research. Now, we had a long interview with him, Professor Chandra and I. So happened we were in Delhi at that time, but it's like 250 pages of or more. The story he tells us of how peasant movement was built in Punjab is so different from anything that you will get in any document. Like one of the first things he said to us was, he said, who was the Congress in Punjab? He says, I was the Congress in Punjab. That's how he says, we were the Congress. In the rural areas, there was no other Congress. We were the Congress. We were part of the Congress. So we went to the villages as congressmen and as Kisan Sabha leaders. So, and then he describes it graphically. He said, I would get onto my bicycle and I would have two sets of forms in my hand. One would be a form, the 4 anna membership of the Congress Party. And the other form would be the 1 anna membership of the Kisan Sabha. And every village I go to, I will go there, I will call a meeting, I will have some cadre with me, I will give the initial thing, I will say you all become members, give them this thing on why they need to join, this, that and the other. And then leave that work to the other people to make the member. Then by then I'll go to the next village on my bicycle. And by the evening I would have covered 10 villages and made members of what? Congress and Kisan Sabha at the same time, the same person. Where will you ever get this story in any archives, in any written document? And the thing is that Harkishan Singh Surjit hasn't even written a memoir. But I doubt that even if he wrote a memoir, necessarily he will tell this story. Because here is the story he's telling because we are asking him specific questions. It's also the questions you ask, So the question people are, okay, so what happened? So usually the person will start with big things. We had this struggle here, we had this meeting there. Then you go further and say, no, I want to know exactly how you mobilized people. Did you go door to door? Did you go at night hiding because you were afraid that you would be caught? Did you go in the daytime? Was it an open movement? Was it a clandestine? These are all very important to understand how movements in the colonial period, including radical movements, were conducted. And what was the role of religion? What was the role of gurdwaras? I could tell you so many stories. Like in Punjab, for example, whenever they wanted to have some big conference, they would do what they call, it was in the Sikh tradition, a collection for the langar. They would say now thousands of people are going to come and attend this big Kisan Sabha conference, so many communist leaders are coming, Jayaprakash Narayan is coming, sometimes even Jawaharlal Nehru is coming. So we have to have a big meeting, so they go house to house and collect grain, wheat. That's how the peasants would contribute. They would give 1 kilo or whatever, 1 seir of this thing, and they would collect these things you will never get. These details of how they act only from the participants. If you show some interest and you show some capacity to get the people to give you this information, if you ask questions, that's what I'm also saying. The issue is not so much to get factual data out of you. Yes, where you don't have data. Usually factual data, somewhere or the other, will be available in some, written source. It is more the understanding. It is more the this thing of how they understood what was going on. When you said what was the ideology, I began with that. Now, when I asked Harkishan Singh Surjit or 1,000 others that we interviewed. What was the ideology with which you went to the people? Now, invariably, the first thing they will say was, of course, our ideology was anti-imperialism against the British. First thing is always that we are part of this movement, we have to throw out the British, because unless we throw out the British, nothing can happen. Then after that, we say, so what will come after the British go? And then we say, Mazdoor Kisan Raj. That is your ideology, that you introduce the idea of a peasant and workers society. You don't say socialism like that. Now, interestingly also, we ask this question to everybody. How did the word socialism come into the Indian political, dialogue? And each and every person, from top to bottom, from Surjit to EMS to everyone, said Jawaharlal Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru is the person who took the ideology, the word, the idea of socialism, he introduced it into India during his election campaign for the provincial elections in 1936-37. Everywhere he went, he was the main campaigner for the Congress, and left was in the Congress at that time. Right? They all fought on Congress tickets. Everywhere he went, he said, the main problem of India is poverty. How do we get rid of this poverty? First, we have to throw out the British. And there is only one answer I know, the only answer I know to the poverty, abolishing poverty in India is socialism. And then he would explain what is socialism. He talked a bit about the Soviet Union. Broad strokes. Each and every peasant leader, common leader, they said, after they use the word socialism to go to the people. They didn't understand. But Congress President, Nehru was Congress President at that time, Congress President saying socialism meant it opened the way for us to now talk this language. So how you understand the relationship between different ideologies, different kinds of... The other thing which the word I used was consciousness. See, consciousness is different from ideology. Here we are trying to find out what actually is there in the mind of the masses. What is their consciousness about, their political consciousness about why they are doing what they are doing. Right? When a person comes and joins a struggle, when he sacrifices, when he is going to jail, when family is suffering, he or she will only do it if there is a strong feeling, a strong understanding of something. Exploitation, humiliation, racism, maybe. We don't know. To find that out, archives and newspapers and all are useless. The only way you can do it is by actually going to people, or to going to people who were close to the people. So obviously I can't today, I couldn't even in the 80s go to and find an ordinary peasant who was, participating. Some places we did. But the leader who's got his pulse of the person, you ask them, why did the people join this struggle? What was in their mind? And they know, because they are the ones who are mobilized. They know what is in the mind of those who are joining, because they have to talk to those people in their language, knowing what is in their mind and drawing them out with the leader and the political worker. Now, who better to find out this? Otherwise, it's impossible. Otherwise, what we do is we work backwards from action. We logically deduce that if a person joined a struggle in which the slogan is land to the tiller, that person believes in land to the tiller. Now, that may not be true. There may be a broad slogan of land to the tiller, but the actual person who's participating may be doing so because he has lost his land, not necessarily because he believes in the ideology of land to the tiller. So what is it that's motivating people? Some experience of loss, some experience of humiliation, some experience of often earlier having a higher status, which they have lost because of some reforms or some, landlord having acquired more power, or the bureaucracy favoring the landlords or whatever. is very often the reason why people will join a peasant struggle. I'm giving you examples from different kinds of movements. As far as the national movement is concerned, again, it is very important to go beyond the broader strokes of the slogans and all that, to ask what actually was motivating people. And there, I would say, oral history is a very, very fine source for doing that. I already gave you the example of how movements had actually organized. I just gave you one example from Suji, but I could give you, hundreds of such examples of finding out, because I think that is so important. It's about struggles, And for example, the question, what is the most important way in which people express themselves politically in India during that period of the freedom struggle? And I'm including your trade union movements and peasant movements and women's movements and part of that broad period of mass struggle. So very interesting. After all, yes, many people went to jail. Many people suffered. But obviously many-fold more did join the movement, but they are not the ones who went. They may be one. Maybe 10%, 5% of those who were actually joining the movement went to jail. So the issue then becomes that, so what is the form through which an ordinary Indian who wants to express his or her solidarity with the freedom struggle, what is that form through which they express? Because obviously there are many fold more. And thinking about this, you ask these questions and then you begin to get the picture. Whether it is a communist leading a peasant movement, whether it is a Dange leading a trade union movement, or whether it is women's movement or whatever, the mass meeting, the public mass meeting, whether in the village square or in the neighboring district and taluka headquarters or in the big city, where the crowd may go into a few lakhs in Bombay or Delhi or Calcutta, it may be a few hundreds in the smaller places. A public participation in a public meeting was the most common and important form of political expression in India. This was also a way of trying to understand the dynamics of politics of that time. So, what did people do? When they wanted to express their solidarity, they voted, as we say, with their feet by going to attend a political meeting where they then showed their, and in the process, many went to jail because they would be picked up or whatever, did satyagraha or joined the movements where they actually would defy the law. But many did not. I say vast majority did not, right? But that doesn't mean that participation is any less important. The freedom struggle, your Kisan movements and all, are all made up of these thousands of such mobilizations where the most important form. Now, how do you realize this? You realize this by talking to people, by asking them when you say, Acha, when you told somebody you must join the movement, what does that mean, joining? Because not everybody is not, you're not asking everybody to join a satyagraha. A particular action against a landlord, like in Malabar, for example, peasant movement took the form. People would collect in what they called a jatha, the tenants and all, and they would march to the house of the landlord, which is usually on a hill, and go and sit down over there and demand that these are our demands. Change the way you are measuring the rice, give us our more share, increase the wages, whatever it is. And it would be like a public dharna. And they would sit there till the landlord gave in and this thing. But what is this? I mean, what is this form? It is a form of public procession. So meetings and processions seem to be in India in that period the most common form across movements. Whether it is a trade union in Bombay, what do? They call a meeting. Now, please try and think, it's not everywhere. In the Soviet Union, when you were doing the revolution, you didn't call a public meeting. You would be massacred. You had secret meetings, you know. This was not an open movement. In China, you're not, if I say what is the form of protest of the Chinese Revolution, what will you say? Guerrilla struggle. They form Red Army. But in India, how to understand the different character of the movements, oral history becomes extremely important. You have to be sensitive to it, then this is the kind of information which is not available in your other sources, which you can. The other reason, yeah, of course. So in addition to memories of events, of people, of places, oral history enables us to get a peep into their understanding, their perceptions, their analysis of what they witnessed, experienced and participated in. That's very important. Oral testimonies are also crucial for understanding the social milieu in which the individuals who became activists grew up. The family background, the religious background, the caste and class location, education, the role of teachers, which Adithya already mentioned, who were the motivating personalities in their growing up, who inspired them to join the movement, the village or the town, the region, the cultural, linguistic, political traditions. When you do an interview with, with all these sensitivities, you can actually try and understand a whole milieu, a whole period through that interview. So therefore, in our work, we followed what was called the life story approach. That is, we requested the interviewees to begin not with the memories of the freedom struggle or of the particular movement in which they had participated, but with their earliest memories of their growing up in the family, in the village or town, their memories of their school, where we learned of the crucial role that's of the school teachers and ever so often of the mother, and gradually build up to their memories of their political participation, their own role, what they observed, their interactions with others, and their interactions with big leaders, with small leaders. You have to be very careful not to ask leading questions. That is very important. The role of the interviewer must be almost invisible. You must only prod. In fact, the less you interfere, the better, answers you will get. Once in a while, you intervene to if the person is praying or you want an emphasis on a certain thing which you are not getting to. But you must, in order to put the person at ease, you must let them get totally immersed in their own memories. It's when that happens that they begin to really tell you very, very valuable insights, experiences. Of course, your questions, I think when and how you ask your questions. Questions we generally kept and we found that very useful till the end. Once they had finished their story, then we would ask analytical questions, historiographical questions, seek their opinions about certain analysis that historians have done. Do you agree with this? Would you agree with that? Or their differences with other perspectives. You could have a very long part of the interview, but it would always be at the end. The idea is that you must not impose your thinking, your interpretation. The idea in an oral history is not to get confirmation for your own already existing understanding. You are trying to broaden your understanding. You are trying to authenticate your understanding. You are trying to question your own understanding. You must be open to the new insights, the new, whatever analysis that you are getting, but often it may be completely different from what you may be expecting or you may be thinking, and you have to, that again I would say that is something we have to keep for every source. But in this case, because you are there, you have to see that you do not influence people. Sometimes if you give a hint in a certain direction, have a tendency, yes, that's right. You know, so you have to be extremely careful not to reveal, you know, what you may be thinking or not thinking. Okay. Also, not everybody writes or can write memoirs, right? Grassroots level activists, women, Dalit participants, most of these people will not be writing memoirs. So the only way of actually writing people's history, if that's what we want to call it, is to hear the voices which are not recorded in the newspapers, in the archives, or in party pamphlets and manifestos. Many, in fact, we found, have a hesitation in telling their own story. Why? They say, no, we don't focus on ourselves and big struggle. We don't want to talk, you know, play and give make ourselves into heroes. Sometimes it's very difficult then to persuade them that our objective also is not to do personal histories. We are not doing the interview in order to glamorize or valorize any particular person. No, we are doing it to understand. And you are somebody who is very important to understand your surroundings, to understand. Through you we can understand, like we did an interview with the son of C. Rajagopalachari. He refused to interview. He just refused, plain refused. It took us so long to persuade him because he said, no, this is self-projection. I don't believe in self-projection. He said, but we can't find out anything about your father. What you can tell us, nobody else can tell. You know, and it's true. Finally, we persuaded him. And in fact, some of the gems which he told us about C. Rajagopalachari, we have not found anywhere else. The simplicity of the man. You know, he continued to live as chief minister in the same house which he lived when he was a struggling lawyer. How they did not even take any payment when they were, this son was working as the head of ashram, and the company told him to take 10 rupees salary which we are giving to every other ashram person. He said, no, my father has told me I am not to take anything. And they used to, what he describes of the life which they lived. I mean, here is C. Rajagopalachari, who was the first Governor General of India. You know, and if you actually hear the story from his son of what life they lived, you will have a completely different picture in your mind. So very often people are very reluctant to, you know, people often would tell us, how do you know they're telling the truth? Everybody will try to give an exaggerated idea of their own role. And you know, we found the opposite. It was difficult to persuade people to talk about their own role. They are quite happy to talk about the role of others, you know. You know, my comrade so-and-so did this, so-and-so did this. But tell us about your role also. They, on the contrary, so at least the experience we had, probably because we were talking to people who had after all sacrificed their lives for the projection at all. We never faced this problem. We faced the opposite problem of not wanting to tell even legitimate stories which would be so inspiring and illustrative of the times that we had to sometimes, as I said, work very hard. Often when we would go to an area and go to a person's house and they say, oh, by the way, have you interviewed that person? I said, no, you tell us the name. And usually that would, if it was a communist, he will be giving us the name of a Gandhian. And if it's a Gandhian, he is giving us the name of a communist. And say, but you must interview that person. He knows so much, which we don't. You know, we never found that competitive thing also, that Gandhian not wanting you to interview a communist or vice versa. So the kind of relationship between people that we found belonging to different ideologies at the ground level, again, is something that you cannot understand from the sources. Now, I could give you many examples, but I think time is now short and I've made. Okay, well, Adithya reminds me of one particularly interesting story. There was this, Vadilal ice creams? Is it popular here, Vadilal? But you know the name. So, now Vadilal was a capitalist, the Gujarati capitalist, who founded this ice cream brand. So he was a capitalist, but he was very much a freedom fighter. So he went to jail in all the big movements like civil disobedience movement, Quit India movement. Not just he supported the movement, but he went to jail also. He's a very active freedom fighter. Very close to Sardar Patel and all that. Ahmedabad-based, good, solid Gujarati businessman. So Adithya did the interview with him, and he asked him. So he's talking about how he was funding the election campaign of a communist, that was Dinkar. Dinkar Mehta was the most prominent communist of Gujarat. And in his story, he's telling Adithya that how he funded Dinkar Mehta's so-and-so election campaign. He said he didn't have any money, so I gave him money. So Adithya said, but why were you funding the election campaign of a communist? So he said, why? What's wrong with that? Is something wrong with communism? I quite agree with the ideas. These are the kind of gems which you come across of, where is that we imagine, as I said, party documents in that period will probably, maybe calling Jawaharlal Nehru the red face of the bourgeoisie, or the People's War and Quit India movement, the struggle they have over that. But actually on the ground level, the people are living and behaving and acting in quite a different way. So you can actually have very interesting angles, revelations, insights of a kind that you may not otherwise get. Just one last point, which I found particularly important. See, in the data in archives and all, you don't get beyond the level of generality. Like for example, if you want to know, in the data there will be, okay, so-and-so village participated in this so-and-so. You will never get data on what caste, class, religious background sometimes you may get. Those people who are participating, they belong. You want to break down, you want to know more about, there are assumptions that historians often make about what was the class basis of a particular movement or what is the caste basis of a particular movement. But nobody can tell you better than those who organize those movements themselves. So you ask these questions, you get to know, yes, in this particular locality, it is this caste which was very prominent, or it is this class of peasants which was very prominent, or it was this social group that was very and why? You also get to answer this question. Like I asked Sujit this question. I said, how come you had such a powerful left-led movement in Punjab, but you never took up any issues of Dalits and agricultural laborers? So he looked at me and he said, do you have any idea what the conditions were at that time? He said, you are talking of political mobilization of Dalits? Even to do social reform among those communities was so difficult. That is a communist leader, then General Secretary of the Communist Party, was frankly saying, he said, no, we could not even think of even going for political mobilization to the Dalits, who were mainly the agricultural laborers. There was no question. So, CPI did start a Khet Mazdoor Union, but it was much later, after independence. In fact, Sundaraiah was the only one anywhere in India who started a agricultural workers union in Andhra, but it didn't last for very long. M.G. Ranga had tried to start one in his village in the early, but it never lasted long. So these questions were sometimes from theoretical viewpoint, we make very critical remarks that the left in India you know, they were very compromised, they only had peasant movement, they never had a workers' movement, I mean, agricultural workers' movement. But when you actually talk to people, you realize that it was not for lack of wanting. I mean, I said, after all, you are a communist, you would want to organize the labor in the village. He said, yes. But where is the question? That you have any idea the level of existence of the Dalit communities? They lived outside the village, they lived in terrible conditions. Their social and consciousness, and you know, there was no question. He just dismissed my question. He said, there was no question, you have no idea what the conditions were. You know, now, right or wrong or whatever, I have to take that seriously, you know. I can't only go by my analysis of, economic analysis of landlessness and say, ideally communists should have organized this. That's not how real life is. You know, there's so much else that goes into that. So I'll stop here.
So what a fantastic lecture on oral testimony. A veteran historian who worked so many years in the archives, you know, have narrated a rich experience of meeting people and talking to.
And by the way, I also read 20 years of the Daily Tribune. Each day.
Each day.
Each day. So it's not that I didn't look at the different sources.
Yeah.
I also read my 20 years of government reports.
This is a great experience for us, you know, listening to you, especially, you know, having read your most authoritative books on modern Indian history, especially freedom movement and various ramifications of freedom. Meeting people, talking to them, and understanding and documenting histories, memories like that. So now this lecture, very interesting lecture, we open for a discussion. We can ask questions. We can. I think many of you, especially the young researchers, have benefited from this lecture because the methodology she was, talking to you, just the methodology. Now, open for discussion. But I wish to make a comment.
Please.
It's very interesting comment that while I was attending the refresh program in JNU, Professor Mridula was taking a class. She took class for about 2.5 hours on means periodization of history, things like that, and emperor extended state resource, sorts of things, and she asked questions for audience. I was sitting in the front, second from the front. I decided to ask a question on oral history. And the person who was sitting next to me was from JNU CHS. He has never asked anything on oral history. Perhaps she may get angry because oral history is not supposed to be objective. Anyway, I heard the question. And I asked why oral history is not being practiced in India. That is there in UK, we have so many organizations, associations in America and all. Why in India it is not there? Because we have very diverse kind of testimonies, memories. It's not a universal kind of memory that Indians do have. So things like that, I posed the question. She brilliantly responded to me. For about 20-25 minutes, it was a lecture on oral history, even quoting from Paul Thompson, Alessandro Portfolio, all such historian. And she also mentioned about the work done by Bipin Chandra.
Okay.
Then only I got to know about the work done by Bipin Chandra and Adithya and Mridula and all historians. So this is a wonderful work. I think might to go in the field of oral history. And one question, why do you said that actually these people narrate the life story. They're talking for a very long time and that the transcriptions are made. But one thing is there, but there is a point of difference there. Of course, I agree with 100% agree with you. But if we interview a farmer in a locality on, say for example, on understanding landscape changes, some questions are necessary for making them sure that they are located the right kind of source.
Absolutely. I mean, for different subjects,
Yeah.
of course there will be a different protocol of, but still, the main thing I would say is that the emphasis has to be to get that person's
Definitely.
information and view and not your own.
Sure.
The questions must not be leading questions.
Exactly.
That,
Exactly.
regardless of the subject, So that is very, in surveys I often find, these questions, people come to the survey, the questions are so loaded.
Exactly.
You have to make sure that your questions are neutral, So the person has an opportunity to take a different approach also to what you may be suggesting.
Sure.
Not that, okay, as you said, if you want to talk to a father,
Mm.
see the impact of a certain thing, you must be open-minded. I think that is very important for the historian to be open-minded. Willing to learn from your respondents, not seek confirmation. I think that's very important.
That's exactly.
If you only want to seek confirmation, then it's not fair. You know.
So now please ask questions, it's a very interesting topic.
You can sit for so long.
Yes, yes. So there, it takes some time.
I think this is not a question. I'm just sharing my thought when I was hearing you. And from this moment, I believe that before going for an interview, we will set a questionnaire, then we will ask. And I, from my head, I truly believe that it is validating. But now I realize that it's more than validating. I do not go to the leading questions. It's an important insight to me. Thank you for that insightful lecture. And again, I have another question for Dr. Adithya Mukherjee. That in the previous lecture, after your lecture, Dr. Mukherjee Joseph shared his anxiety over the tyrant. And we are hopeless. He said like that we are hopeless in this political situation like that. So, but after hearing the lecture of Dr. Mukherjee, I believe that the peasants is there, the workers is there, their power or their conviction to react something oppressing is there. But I think I would believe like that there is we are in the leadership to organize that people. We have failed to raise their voices and some of or majority of the people. It's maybe my convictions are not right. Political student or so I believe that they didn't realize that they are oppressed. Is that right?
Sorry, what is oppressed?
They believe that, or they fail to realize that they are being oppressed. Their rights are not properly addressed like that. It's my personal experience that before the last 2 weeks, not last 2 weeks elections. Before our assembly elections, majority of the youngsters below 20 years or 25 years, majority of the youngsters shared an opinion like this: we are not interested to vote. Why that kind of negligence or a kind of they are reluctant to even in inertia or the that is addressing. So it's what's your taking that? Is it the problem of the time or the problem of our leadership or the conviction of our youngsters to address these issues?
Thank you. You raised very fundamental questions to which society needs an answer. There is even when you first said that the two levels in which you raised your questions. One was that is it that people are becoming apathetic? They don't see their oppression, and you also raised the issue of leadership. What is the leadership doing? The absence of leadership. All of what you are saying is true. What those who are supposed to be leading the people in a progressive direction are either migrating abroad or are doing self-seeking jobs. In the sense, promote myself, not worry about the people too much. The other side, on the other hand, is providing a sense of power to the poor by polarizing the people. The what we call the stormtroopers of the BJP, the people who do running around and all the shouting around, are these unemployed youth. Unemployed, poor youth, their life is actually miserable. The only sense of power they have is they have a spear in their hand and they can go and beat up anybody they like. So you are creating a sense of power among the poor, among the powerless. Now, it can be done, but that's why your question is relevant. Why is the counter not being done? When in actuality people are suffering from unemployment, from poverty, from injustice, social and political, economic injustice, why are we people, the leadership, not able to hone in on that? The answer, there is no answer to that. I mean, that leadership has to emerge. And there is no reason why it will not emerge. In some cases, for example, in the case of the present uprising in Punjab 2 years ago during the COVID period, remember, for 1 year, the peasants of Haryana, UP and Punjab, for 1 year, sat outside the capital, weathered the worst weather, cold, hot summer, monsoon, plus police repression. Plus COVID. And they fought it out till they won. And they found a leadership. Leadership emerged from absolutely nowhere almost. People who were doing clerical jobs, school teachers, etc., gave up their jobs and started doing seva there. That is what happened during the national movement also. That is what they say about Gandhiji, that he made heroes out of ordinary people. Ordinary people suddenly felt that they needed to do that. So, a movement type of situation needs to arise. How it will arise, when it will arise, we don't know. But that is the only answer. Only then will people begin to raise issues of the other.
Just add to that, I think Adithya is saying something important. I think when we, and this gentleman earlier who spoke about a sense of despair, I think, one way of answering these questions is to see what's happening around us which is succeeding. Why do we not, when we talk about it, why don't we immediately think about the farmers' movement? Why don't we immediately think about the anti-CA NRC movement? Such powerful struggles. And struggles don't last forever, they have to end somewhere, and in this case, NRC and all, we know what happened. But this, the farmer struggle, the Punjab and Haryana and all that, after all, they managed to bring the government down. And they had to revoke those, which is unheard of. In this government, in this atmosphere, without political parties, again the thing is, where are we putting our questions? Now, their political parties did not play an important role. In fact, there were independent unions. Now, the important thing was there were a number of unions of different kinds which were working among the farmers, right? There were radical ones, there were middle of the road ones, there were some. They all got together. And what they called a Samyukt Kisan Morcha, a united Kisan front, struggle. They formed that. And they managed to hang together despite all differences right through the struggle. So it was a real mass movement where supplies of food and wood and grain and everything was coming organized manner from villages. Villages were being told that tomorrow is your turn, tomorrow is your turn. The Gurdwaras would do it in Punjab, other people would do it, and so continuously there was people were coming in turns. Okay, now it's going to be your turn, you go for 1 week, your village. You have to supply 100 people. So like that. Now, when we are asking these questions, why don't we study these actual movements which didn't happen 100 years ago or even 50 years ago, but happened 5 years ago? You know, why don't we look at those closely? Well, contemporary history, let's look at these. These are ways of understanding and also politically enriching our own understanding of what can be done. Go and ask those people, how did you hang together? I mean, you were there, so many different leaders were there, and we have to say leaders can't come together because like, they came together na? For a cause. They came together also because something drastic was happening. And some farmers also realized that this is an attack on their way of life. They'll be ruined, they'll be finished if the Adanis took over. That was what was going to happen. The multinationals and big capitalists were going to take over. You know today that in Shimla and in Kashmir, almost all the apples are now marketed by Adani. But what is this? All airports, all apples. We started getting apples in Delhi with the stamp of Adani on it. You know, label. I mean, what is going on? I mean, these are things which have to be talked about, which have to be understood, it's not that people don't understand. People, yes, on their own, often people don't understand, but they understand their own conditions. Also have to make them aware of, these are all part of India, you know, where it happened. I mean, you know, it's not some other country. So I think this is the way to, I would say, how to learn from history which is going on around you for, you know, learning how to go about things. What Adithya said was fantastic. Even our JNU students went and joined this farmers' struggle. There were students who went and they all got together and they started bringing out a daily newspaper. What was it called? Yes, Tractor Times. You know, yeah, the tractor was the symbol of that struggle, you know, because all the tractors had lined up. So they called it Tractor Times, and every day they would bring out this newspaper with all the news and all that. As he said, so many people, stories where they gave up their jobs and came and joined this, young people. So that's what a movement does. Huh? It touches you, inspires you, and the thing is, it enables you to contribute. It enables, gives you a role. Here was a movement ongoing, you could go and find a role. Everybody who went over there found some role, something to do. It was not, that's what a big movement does. You don't have to just sit on the sideline. You can go and contribute.
Any other questions? Vishnu, you have a question?
I think he said.
Yes. A prominent CPM leader in Kerala. Answering the question why India right now, and while admitting that if they had a correct comprehensive answer, they would have already. One thing that he theorized, that the mentality of an average Indian, that is something I'm paraphrasing, the concept of, you know, multiple births, and this birth, this incarnation, this Janma is like this, so and so, we will manage it in the next birth, next cycle. And he tried to theorize like that. I wanted to know if you had such first-hand, maybe first-hand experience or stories of the leaders, political leaders of various levels, their experience. I want to know if there is actually such a sentiment among the common people of India.
My answer to that will be, even if there is such a belief in karma, in rebirth and all, how is it that when there is a powerful movement that disappears and people join, when there is nothing and you can't find another explanation, you say it is the fatalism of the Indian people. But the same Indian people, the same fatalism, you know, Gandhi could organize them, Mukherjee could organize them, Gopalan could organize them, you know, Kelappan could organize them. How is it when you don't have an explanation, you come out with the fatalism of the Indian people? The people are wrong. So what do? You want to change the people? Can you change the people? No, you have to find a way of talking, of reaching out to the same people. That's not an answer. No, that's not an answer at all. So I don't buy that. And no, we never came across people giving this kind of explanation that, people, they were fatalistic or they were this or that or the other. In fact, on the contrary, those who work with the people and have been in movements with people will always tell you about the capacity of the people to struggle.
The energy of the people.
That,
Exactly opposite.
how the ordinary person can get inspired. The issue is how do they get inspired, to understand that. That's what I was saying. Your link between your ideology and the consciousness of the participant has to be established. What is Gandhiji's greatness? Gandhiji's greatness was not that he came out with some new philosophy of nationalism or whatever. He knew how to talk to the person. He knew how to make sense to the peasant. He knew how to talk the language of the peasant. He had a way of identifying through his own life. It was not gimmickry. If he gave up his clothes and wore only a loincloth, the people understood it's not gimmickry. It's not to show. It's because he really identifies. Because he lived it his whole life. He lived his whole life in ashram. He lived his whole life like that. So that begins to affect people. When people find that somebody is trying to actually identify with them in terms of their real needs, their real feelings, And so he was able to mobilize the Indian people in a way that nobody could. And we have to try and understand that. And mind you, we found that people of leaders, workers of all political views, in fact, we are thinking that we may bring out a separate volume of just different people's views on Gandhi. Because what is fantastic is, across the streams, everybody begins by saying, but then Gandhi was something else. And we have to understand. The kind of critiques of Gandhi that you read in the party literature or even in the memoirs or whatever of the time, you don't find it when you actually talk to the people. Now, Mukherjee in his interview, what does he say? I was inspired by Nehru. He was a great Nehruite. Totally inspired by Nehru. He talks about his meetings with the revolutionaries in the jail. How Bhagat Singh's associates were with him in Cannanore jail, in his first jail term. And he talks about how, he mixes with them and how he's inspired by them. So it's a very different picture that emerges, when you actually, but no, none of this, you see, finding excuses is what this is, This is not an answer. This is like as a teacher, if I blame my students, and say my students are so bad, what can I do? I should look at myself as a teacher, critically. Maybe something's wrong in me. I can't communicate.
First of all, thank you, ma'am, for your wonderful class about oral testimonies. So, we are also doing an internship project with the Ministry of Sebastian about oral history. And now, this is not a question, so I am asking for some guidance from you. And soon, we are going to submit our final presentation on the internship report of our work. And can you give some guidelines?
What have you done? The oral history part? What is it?
My topic was about the landscape changes of the agricultural field near my house. There's a party field, I bought 26 acres of land, but now there is only 3 acres of land where the cultivation is done. Paddy field. And I studied about that and I seek some interviews from the people neighboring there and from farmers. And can you give some guidelines?
So you tell me, what did you find in those interviews?
The paddy and other vegetables, but now there is no any cultivations. Only a few amount of land were used to cultivate paddy. interested in this. So we are interviewing some people and information and going to some reports and our future studies.
Your final report will depend on what you have gathered in your evidence. You present whatever evidence you have in the most honest manner, right? And so my question to you would be that, what did you understand? Why it happened? What is your conclusion after doing those interviews and looking at the reality? Why has it declined so much, the paddy cultivation?
People are not interested in this.
That's not an answer. Why are people not interested? Ask the next question. What do you mean people are not interested? Why? There has to be a reason, no? It's not a fashion. People wear this today, that tomorrow.
More advanced, they are going for more economy.
More?
Economy based.
Like what? Are you speculating or are you telling me what you learned? Did you ask this question? Why are you not interested?
Because people looking for more better lifestyle.
Better?
Better lifestyle.
Better?
Lifestyle.
Lifestyle. Okay. So what you are saying is that this was not giving them enough income.
They are moving from rural to urban areas.
Okay. They are giving up farming altogether. They are moving. So did you meet people who have gone to urban areas? Who
No.
stopped?
We see some farmers nearby. Some farmers.
Yeah.
Basically, they interviewed some farmers and they also try to corroborate this testimony evidence with GIS mapping, landscape changes, how the landscape changes. They measure the landscape exactly. So actually, they were actually making inroads into the integration of oral testimony plus GIS technology, like that he was thinking.
So what you have basically confirmed is the actual reduction.
Yeah, exactly.
But may not be able to get adequate answers to why.
Yeah,
Because that will need more
more research.
more research, because you can, I mean, possible answers can be that paddy cultivation is not so lucrative. Now, also, what is that land gone into? What is happening there now?
There is nothing.
Nothing. It is that fallow.
It is left fallow. No cultivation is happening in it.
Nothing.
So who does it belong to? The people who are owning the land.
It belongs to the temple and nearby owners of the land.
Temple is the owner?
Yes.
The major portion of the
And
land.
Major portion of the land is about the temple.
Under the ocean.
Yes.
So nobody wants to cultivate the temple land.
So, you would know the answer because rice cultivation, we are seeing it's declined
Basically, ma'am, it's
everywhere.
we were actually trying to locate the reasons for the loss of interest in agriculture. More than that, we try to locate, trace out the exact changes in landscape. Using this GIS mapping and all such things. So experts came from Environmental Sciences Department to take class on this. So now there are corroborating evidences.
Right.
So there are so many reasons, Generally there are said to be many reasons. It is not lucrative. People are losing interest. The young generation is not interested in doing agriculture.
But that land is not then given over to some other.
It is not given out to other purposes.
activities.
It has not gone for urbanization. The area which is there is.
Okay.
Yeah, it remains as such.
Or it is not coconut farming.
No coconut farming and nothing. Because actually these were paddy fields.
I understand.
And left as such. Only a limited area is being cultivated again. So actually this shows the tendency among people not to cultivate, even if the land is left fallow. Two reasons. Why? One is it is not profitable. Second, they lost the interest. Because they are the children or people connected with that, migrate to other regions. People are not there to do the cultivation. And no societies, no cooperative societies also come up. So multiple reasons are there. So any other questions to Professor Adithya Mukherjee? Some researchers are there. Actually, you have no question? Faculty, you are from which department?
Right now I'm doing a research at St.Mary College.
Yeah.
And also I also work as a guest faculty in
History department.
It's an economics department. History is the minor subject.
Oh, I see.
Which
No.
Which college? Which college?
It's in Cochin.
It's
It's
in
in Cochin. No, you are doing research in history, no?
Yes, I've started my research recently.
Yeah.
It's an environmental.
Doctor, you have no comments, nothing? Yeah. Okay, then we can wind up the session, I think. Sir, you have a question? No.
History. Are you from Punjab? No. Mr. Pratap, am I correct? We are from.
She is from West Pakistan, I am from East Pakistan.
Both
refugees in India.
Correct.
My father is from Lahore, my father is from Dhaka.
We are from Kerala. In these three states, we are not with the mainstream. The Bengal, the Mamata is ruling. Punjab, AM is ruling. Kerala, CPM is ruling. We are criticizing. We are making history, but they are not mind. So,
That is why they want to punish Kerala and Bengal and Punjab. The words in Bengal are going to be critical.
Sir, Professor Adithya Mukherjee and Professor Mukherjee, thank you very much for being with us. Now, just from my point of view, starting with two other lectures, one on contemporary history as a method, how well he placed it. It was initially it was very difficult to follow him, but contemporary history itself is a method. Living in the present world itself is a method of reacting. If you are living in 21st century, you have to go back to 20th or 19th centuries from the 21st century's mindset, shattering 21st century's mindset, creating a methodology of your own, a method of your own. So that's what Professor Adithya was indicating, implicating. So that's a political history. It's not just as a method, but also as a politics of history. Thank you very much, sir. As well as Mridula Mukherjee's, I have never listened to this kind of a lecture from you because this is oral history, entirely different from the usual take of Mridula Mukherjee. So that was also fantastic and quite revealing. The predicament with the historiography of Kerala is basically, as many historians, some historians say, it is a temple-centric, paddy-centric histories. We are moving around that and still busily researching into at what point of time, he had the acts like that, to make a departure. And this room filled with such ideas, at St. Mary's College, especially the history department, on the eve of its becoming a research department. I think that this will be definitely a defining engagement, a defining moment in the historiography of Kerala. Even though there are only very few, participants, sometimes, like the German proverb says, sometimes the fly is stronger than a lion. So, anyway, it will be like that. Thank you so much, sir. From my part, being a guest faculty here, I am a guest faculty here, along with Anand and all my young faculty members. Now you can have the official vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. I think it is a crime to register my vote of thanks in a lengthy manner, so I will shrink it. And also, I am not competent enough to register the vote of thanks to the two luminary lectures we have here. But for the sake of the time, I would like Mukherjee and Madam Mridula Mukherjee and our dear Professor, Dr. Sebastian Joseph sir. And whenever these three meet, it was like a downpour of scholastic ideas and informations like a monsoon cloud. That's it. From the on behalf of the department, the students gathered here, and on behalf of the scholars, I would like to register our thanks to you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. And also, I would like to thank myself and on behalf of my department to our research supervisor, Dr. Tindu Joseph, who is here, and the scholars who are gathered here from CMS College, Bharat Mada College, Ding, and appreciating our venture here. Again, sir, for your right observation, we are clapping our hands or holding our hands for that nice political observation here. Once again, I would like to thank you all you gathered here and for organizing such a national seminar in a short period. This is without the initiative of our HOD and our department, the faculties, Mr. Shainovi and Didi Joseph, this will not be happened. So thank you all, and in this later hour, you will have a good lunch.
Ma'am and sir, nice to meet you. How do you guys look these beautiful messages? I mean, you have a cute smile. What? Cute smile.
Very many young people all the time. That's the secret. Regularly not daily, but we are always.
Very